My name is Jeannie Scalmanini. I am Executive Director of Alumni and Parent Engagement here at CMC. We are very excited to welcome you to the first installment of our fall CMC Connects programming. Rebecca puts that programming together working with our incredible faculty and our alumni and our current students. And she has an excellent lineup ready for you this fall, but today's is very exciting. I'll be very honest, Professor Miller is here, but we are stalling just a bit. We have a student moderator for today, Quentin Carney. He is a senior, the class of 2026, and there he is. He just finished a test.
Hi, everyone. My name is Quentin Carney. I'm a senior at CMC studying public policy. I'm a research assistant at the Rose Institute of State and Local Government. I'm here today with Professor Miller. Professor Ken Miller is CMC's Don H. and Odessa Rose Professor of State and Local Government. He joined the Government Department in 2003 and became director of the Rose Institute in 2021. Professor Miller's scholarship focuses on state politics, constitutional law, and political polarization. His most recent book is Texas v. California, A History of Their Struggles and a Future of America. He received a BA in Government from Pomona College, a JD from Harvard Law School, and a PhD in Political Science from the University of California at Berkeley. While in college, he participated in CMC's Washington program. Before pursuing a career in academia, he worked as an attorney at Morrison & Forrester in Los Angeles and Sacramento. Professor Miller has been a visiting scholar at the James Madison program at Princeton University and the John Tower Center at SMU. He lives in Claremont with his wife, Kimberly, and their daughter, Jenna.
All right. And why don't you tell a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So I'm a senior at CMC. I'm originally from Boise, Idaho. In high school, I was interested in state and local government, and I ended up being a page in my state legislature, in addition to volunteering for some political campaigns for city council. Upon attending CMC, I I immediately tried joining the Rose my freshman year, later decided to take a gap year before reapplying as a sophomore, and I've loved it ever since. I've had a specialty on trying to focus in on like election results and election analysis, in addition to further developing my ArcGIS skills.
All right. Well, this is good. It's fun to see everybody on the screen here, many of whom I know, some of whom I don't. And it's fun to be presenting here with Quentin, who actually knows more about congressional districts and sort of the nuts and bolts of elections across the country than I do. He's a fantastic political junkie and exactly the kind of student we like to have at the Rose Institute and at CMC. So it's fun to be here with him. We actually recently co-authored an op-ed for the Southern California News Group on Proposition 50. And as you'll see in a minute, Quentin was the student who put together our video voter guide to Proposition 50 for, I think, since 2012. Every election cycle, the Rose Institute has put together informational videos on California state propositions. And we've gotten a little bit more sophisticated in the production value of these videos over time. But from the beginning, we've been really focused. This was actually a student idea initially to create these informational, nonpartisan videos that would be disseminated out there in the public for people to be able to be better informed about these sometimes complicated ballot measures. And so Quentin produced this one on Proposition 50, which we'll show to you in just a second. And then I think the plan is for me to give a few thoughts about how we got to this place of having mid-decade redistricting wars across the United States, including here in California, and then some of the consequences of Proposition 50. And then we'll have hopefully ample time for your questions. So any other thoughts, Quentin, before we get started?
No, except this is a very unusual circumstance to be doing this for a fall special election ballot.
That's right. We don't have special elections all the time in California. And so this is a unique opportunity. Typically, in odd number years, we don't have election activities to cover at the Rose Institute. We do other things, but we had to kind of gear up quickly once we found out there was going to be an election here in California this fall. And it's been actually pretty fun to do that. So Rebecca, again, I want to thank Rebecca and the Alumni Office for putting this together. And Rebecca, I think, is going to be loading up the video that it's just went on the Rose Institute website today. So if you, we actually have a new URL for our for the Rose Institute. It used to be roseinstitute.org. Now it's roseinstitute.cmc.edu. But if you Google that, you can see Quentin on the front page of our website. And we actually encourage you also, especially those of you in California, if you find this video useful, to forward it on to your friends and family. We love to get as much viewership of our work as possible. So Rebecca, why don't you go ahead?
Should California enact partisan congressional district maps in response to Texas's mid-decade redistricting by overturning nonpartisan maps created by California's Citizens Redistricting Commission? It's up to you to decide. Hi, I'm Quentin Carney, a student researcher at the Rose Institute of State and Local Government, with an analysis of Proposition 50, the measure on this fall's special election ballot. After decades of partisan fights over redistricting, California voters in 2008 and 2010 approved ballot measures to create the Nonpartisan Independent California Citizens Redistricting Commission, or the CCRC, with power to draw state legislative and congressional lines. The CCRC has carried out this task for the past 2 decades. Typically, states redistrict only at the beginning of the decade, shortly after the census. But to preserve the Republican Party's narrow House majority, President Trump urged Texas to redraw its congressional lines this year. Texas approved a new map designed to increase the Republican congressional seat margin by 5 seats, from 25 to 13 to 30 to 8, in next year's midterm elections. California's Democratic leaders responded by proposing a countermeasure designed to flip 5 of the state's 9 Republican congressional seats to the blue column, thereby expanding the Democratic share of the state's House delegation from 43 to 9 to 48 to 4. Proposition 50 would replace the CCRC's congressional map with an explicitly partisan gerrymander for the next 3 election cycles. The measure would not affect state legislative districts and would not permanently eliminate the CCRC's power to draw congressional districts. Prop 50 supporters include Governor Newsom, Democratic members of Congress, the California Democratic Party, and labor groups, with major funding from George Soros and Michael Moritz. Supporters argue Prop 50 is a necessary response to Texas's power grab and will help prevent Republicans from gaining an unfair advantage in the 2026 midterms. The stakes are high, they say, because of next year's elections will determine whether Congress will be able to block Trump's policies during the last 2 years of his administration. The measure's opponents include former Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, congressional Republicans, and the California Republican Party, with major funding from Charles Munger Jr. Opponents argue Prop 50 allows California's partisan politicians to seize power from citizens. They say the measure violates California's hard-won commitment to a nonpartisan redistricting system and to fair competitive elections. Opponents also note that unlike the commission's process, the legislature hastily approved the new map with no public input. In summary, a yes vote on Prop 50 would replace the independent commission's congressional districts with an explicitly partisan plan for the next 3 election cycles. A no vote would retain the current congressional district map enacted by the CCRC. So what do you think? How will you vote on Prop 50? Go to roseinstitute.cmc.edu for more information.
All right, so that's our video, and congratulations, Quentin, for an excellent job on that. When we get into the Q&A, you can, when we get into the Q&A, you can feel free to ask questions of Quentin or about the video or any of the points on it. And you can agree or disagree with any of the analysis, right? But that's our best effort to provide, as we try to do, sort of both sides of the proposition, who's supporting it, who's opposing it, and what some of their key arguments are, and then leave it up to the voters to decide, right? Okay, so I I want to circle back to Prop 50 and the special election at the end of my remarks here, but I thought it might be useful or of some interest to look at the causes of how we got to where we are today in respect to the redistricting wars going on in the United States, and what are some of the conditions that have made this happen. So I'll just tick through some of them. Some of them may seem more obvious than others. The first one is partisan polarization. We are, as a country, deeply divided along partisan lines, and there's this sense of existential threat if the other party gains control of the federal government. And so there's a lot of motivation by both sides to try to gain even marginal advantages in congressional elections in order to try to gain control of Congress. We've had a period of polarization that's lasted some time, and it's actually caused a it's expressed itself in part in geographic polarization as well, which actually enables this kind of mid-decade redistricting war, which is to say that increasing numbers of states are either solidly Republican or Democrat. We sometimes call these trifectas, where one party controls both houses of the state legislature and the governor's office. And under those circumstances, it's easier for the party in power to try to draw district lines that amplify that party's advantage in congressional elections. I think currently we have 23 Republican trifectas in the United States, 15 Democratic trifectas, and only 12 states have split or divided government between the two parties. And so that just creates a condition that can make it more likely for one party to try to get partisan advantage through redistricting. Another factor is the equal political division of the country. So the House of Representatives currently has 219 Republicans and 213 Democrats with 3 vacancies. And so it's just a razor thin margin for the majority party. And so every seat matters, right? And so that motivates people on both sides, in both parties, to try to gain whatever edge or advantage they can. And by being able to pick up a couple of additional seats, or maybe up to 5 seats in Texas and California, for one party or the other, you can see the motivation or the incentive for parties to want to do that, given the narrow margins in Congress and the longstanding and it seems to me durable even division of the country into these two parties. Another condition that has emerged in recent years is kind of confirming what had been de facto the case, but it's now been confirmed by the U.S. Supreme Court, is that there's no constitutional constraint on partisan gerrymandering. So the U.S. Supreme Court in 2018 issued a decision called Rucho versus Common Cause, in which Common Cause was suing the state of North Carolina for a partisan gerrymander, saying it violated the Equal Protection Clause and other provisions of the Constitution. And by a 5-4 majority, the U.S. Supreme Court said, this is a non-justiciable political question. This is not a matter for courts to decide whether partisan line drawing violates constitutional rights. It's up to the political branches of government to determine whether a gerrymander goes too far or is unfair or whatever, and it needs to self-correct. The courts are not going to correct that. Unlike things like racial gerrymandering, where lines are drawn to disadvantage a racial minority group or even potentially to advantage a racial minority group, the courts will take a look at that and supervise or intervene in those types of cases. But in these types of cases we're talking about today, the court has said we're not going to get involved. And then I guess maybe like the last condition would be the current administration in Washington, D.C. President Trump is willing to be aggressive and break what had been sort of norms about the federal government not really getting actively, or at least the president of the United States not getting actively involved in state level redistricting controversies. And so he sort of kicked this all off by going to Texas and strongly encouraging the Texas legislature and the governor of Texas to do this mid-decade redistricting to try to add some Republican seats in Congress. And so those are some of the underlying causes that have gotten us to where we are today. So what we are in now is what some have called an arms race between the two parties and their respective states to try to squeeze out as many congressional seats as they can through creative line drawing for congressional districts. Texas kicked it off. California, as we'll talk more about, responded with countermeasures, which is Proposition 50, to try to gain a comparable number of Democratic seats. But other states are also considering or actively moving toward doing mid-decade redistricting as well, to maybe pick up a seat or two here or there. So Missouri, Indiana on the Republican side, Maryland on the Democratic side, and we might see some others. As you know, as I noted, there are more Republican trifecta states than Democratic. And also the Democrats have something of a handicap in this arms race in that several Democratic states have established state-level constitutional or other rules, either creating independent redistricting commissions or placing other constraints on gerrymandering, more so than most red states. And that plays out in the Texas versus California example. Texas has no real state constitutional constraints on their legislature or the governor maximizing partisan advantage in congressional redistricting. Whereas California does have a constitutional constraint, which is the creation of an independent Citizens Redistricting Commission, which has done the redistricting in California the last two cycles in 2011 and 2021. That was put into the state constitution by voters in 2008 and in 2010. And so in order for California to basically respond to Texas and try to sort of do tit for tat for what Texas did, the governor of California and the legislature has to put the question before voters as opposed to just doing it on their own. And so that's a significant difference between the two states. Okay, so it was, I think, a little unexpected that California would try to do a mid-decade redistricting. It certainly would not have done it if Texas had not sort of led out with its measure back in August. But once Texas did so, I think there was actually some internal debate in California whether to respond in kind, because there is, even among people who are anti-Trump in California, a pretty deep commitment to our system of nonpartisan independent redistricting by groups like Common Cause and the League of Women Voters and other good government groups who may lean left politically, but they also have a pretty strong commitment to this practice. But eventually, there was a couple of interesting examples, or League of Women Voters and Common Cause, which the local California organizations were initially going to oppose California's effort at mid-decade redistricting, but then the national organizations sort of said, no, you've got to come alongside us and try to resist Trump at a national level. And so League of Women Voters, which had initially opposed Prop 50, went to a neutral position, as did Common Cause on these matters. And so these are organizations that were instrumental in the creation of the Independent Redistricting Commission a couple of decades ago. And so it's amazing in a way to see them now supporting an effort to undo commission work and impose a legislative redistricting scheme that clearly advantages one party over the other, which was basically the impetus for the Independent Redistricting Commission, was to try to get rid of that kind of partisan line drawing in the state. But what a lot of those organizations will say is that we're very committed to the principle of independent redistricting, but we're concerned about the national implications of California adhering to this good government practice when other states are not doing it. And so California is essentially unilaterally disarming in this arms race between red and blue states. And so that's a concern. There are others, including former Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was instrumental in getting our commission system in place in 2008 and 2010, who say essentially, and he's in statements he made at a gathering at USC a couple of weeks ago, which have now been converted into TV ads. Schwarzenegger says, "I'm anti-Trump. I don't like what happened in Texas, but California should not try to oppose Trump by becoming Trump," right? Essentially, we shouldn't, like another way of putting it, I don't think Schwarzenegger has said this, but others have said is two wrongs don't make a right. And we should adhere to the principles in California, even if it means maybe in the short term taking on a disadvantage against what red states have done. And so that's sort of the internal debate. And I think probably the election will turn ultimately on whether there's a sufficient number of sort of centrist or left-leaning Californians who don't like Trump, but don't also want to go back to the days of partisan redistricting in California, or whether the anti-Trump sentiment will sort of win the day. And that's how the ad campaigns are playing out in California. Those are the competing messaging. One is we need to adhere to our commitment to independent redistricting. That's the no ads. And the yes ads are we've got to stop Trump from rigging the 2026 election by going to red states and having them capture additional congressional seats through these mid-decade schemes. Okay, so a little bit more about what this plan would actually do. As Quentin said in the video, Texas, which has 38 congressional seats, would go from 25 Republican and 13 Democratic to 30 Republican and 8 Democratic. And that's a very big skew compared to what the overall partisan composition of Texas is, which is it's Republican, but it's not overwhelmingly Republican. If you look at statewide races, they often turn out to be 55-45, somewhere in that neighborhood. And so this gives Republicans a much sort of amplified advantage in congressional races in the state. And so the only districts that are remaining, if you notice on that map of Texas, is all red except for a few blue dots around Houston, Austin, and Dallas-Fort Worth, basically. I think there's one in El Paso as well. But it's a very few Democratic districts, and the lines are drawn in such a way that Republicans sort of capture everything else. In California, which has 52 seats, the current split is 43 Republican and 9 Democratic. So even with independent redistricting, we have a skew toward Democrats in California. There's some debate about this, whether this was actually as fair as it could have been, the Independent Redistricting Commission. But you can see certainly that one could make district lines more Democratic than the commission did, as the Prop 50 map would do. And so 43-9 is the current ratio, and this map is designed to go to 48-4. So what does that mean? In a state where Trump got 38.3% of the popular vote in 2024, 38.3, Republicans would have only 7.7% of the congressional seats, right? So that's a huge skew. Democrats would have more than 90% of the congressional seats in California. The Republican members who are targeted are Doug LaMalfa. He represents sort of the northeastern portion of California, sometimes referred to by the residents there as the want-to-be state of Jefferson. These are people who feel very alienated from California state government and public policy. They're rural people, and they are sort of oriented toward the Republican Party. LaMalfa sort of is representative of that that constituency up there. What this plan would do is, for the northern part of California, it would wrap around over to the coast and all the way down to Marin County. And so you pick up sufficient Democrats to counterbalance and overtake that Republican-oriented northeastern part of the state. The second member, Kevin Kiley, currently in California District 3, would be wiped out. David Valadao, in the 22nd Congressional District in the Central Valley. He's had some of the closest races in the country. He's known as being a Republican who voted for impeachment of President Trump, and yet he's one of the very few Republicans who have survived taking that sort of a position, standing up to Trump. And he has barely survived in his Central Valley district. This is the one district, 22, coming out of this new map that is still, I would say, a competitive-ish district. The new map added a small percentage of Democrats to that district, and maybe just enough to tip it to the Democrats. But that might be one to watch to see that it maybe won't be fully successful in achieving its aims. Closer to home here in Claremont, Ken Calvert represents an Inland Empire district, sort of Riverside County. His district is splintered completely. That's the 41st Congressional District. It's actually moved into, the 41st District is moved into Los Angeles County, into the Gateway Cities area. And his district is a sort of split among other Inland Empire areas. Okay, so his district goes away. And then Darrell Issa, who straddles San Diego, Riverside County areas, would have his district broken up as well. So 5 out of the 9 Republicans in California would lose their seats, and there would be only 4 left standing. Those districts represented by Tom McClintock, Vince Fong, Young Kim, and Jay Obernolte. An interesting one would be Young Kim, who has won narrowly in sort of an Orange County, Inland Empire straddling district. The way this works, redistricting, for those of you who are gurus, aficionados, I see a few of you on the call here, you know this, is you try to be as efficient as possible. You try to build districts so that you have sufficient number of partisans from your party to ensure victory in elections, but not too much. You don't want to waste excess votes in your district, in your party's districts. And so you spread them out efficiently, and then you pack the opposition party's districts into as few districts as possible. And that's sort of what's happening with Young Kim's district, is that all the Republicans in this region are sort of grouped together into her district. So it becomes what had been sort of a marginal Republican district now into a very safe one. There is some talk, so she benefits, unless one of these other members who's knocked out, like Ken Calvert or Issa, decide that they want to move over into her district and challenge her in a now safe Republican district. I don't have any good intel on that, but that could potentially happen, that she might have to fend off a challenger from her own party. But that's sort of the landscape of congressional districts in California will now be overwhelmingly Democratic, with just a few districts, probably 4 districts out of 52, that would be Republican. One other note I would say, this is sort of for the 2030s, is that there is population shift between red states and blue states in general, right? And so the red states tend to be bleeding population. I'm sorry, blue states tend to be bleeding population, red states gaining population, right? And so that's happening in California We actually were losing population for a few years. Demographers think that it's basically flattened out. We've stalled under 40 million people, while the overall US population has grown. So that means that California will lose. We lost a representative for the first time in 2021. We went from 53 to 52, and we're going to lose more in 2031. And conversely, higher growth red states like Texas, Tennessee, North Carolina, places like that are going to gain seats. And so that's going to be a structural advantage for Republicans moving forward. And so that will be something to watch. In California, if there's a loss of three or more congressional seats, you're going to see those coming probably out of the Democratic districts that are being created now through Proposition 50. Okay, just a couple more points. There is some litigation in Texas. There's a challenge to the Texas map. I think the proceedings started in federal court in El Paso maybe yesterday with a Voting Rights Act challenge to the Texas maps. I think they're going to try to fast track that litigation. Among other constraints on state redistrictors, one is that they have to comply with the Federal Voting Rights Act, at least for now. It's an open question whether the Voting Rights Act Section 2 will survive challenge in the U.S. Supreme Court moving forward. But for now, that's still good law. And so there is an active challenge against the Texas district. So we might have this interesting situation where Californians approve Prop 50 and pick up a lot of Democratic seats, and Trump's gambit to go to Texas will be blocked by the courts. And so it'll be a net loss for Republicans, this mid-decade redistricting, which would be something of an irony. There have been state lawsuits against the California effort to put Prop 50 on the ballot, but I haven't totally followed it. But at this point, the California Supreme Court has not entertained sort of state constitutional challenges to Prop 50, and I don't think there's really a viable Voting Rights Act challenge or other challenge to that. All right. I think I've covered most of the points. I would just say one other thing. There's kind of an interesting local angle here in Claremont, which is that one of my colleagues in the politics department over at Pomona College served on the 2011, or this is, I keep getting corrected about this. The commission actually serves for the entire decade. Okay, so it's easy to think that once the maps are approved and the first elections occur, and if there's any litigation, which there wasn't in California this time around, the districts are defended, that the commission's work is done and they are no longer sort of active. But in fact, the law that created Prop 11, which created the commission, extends the commission's life for the full decade. And so this colleague of mine at Pomona serves as a commissioner on the California Citizens Redistricting Commission, was involved in drawing the district lines in California in 2011. Her name is Sarah Sadwani. And initially, when there was talk of California undoing congressional district lines, she expressed some hesitation, reservation about that. But at some point, she decided she changed her mind, and she's become one of the leading advocates of the Yes on 50 campaign. She's a signatory to the ballot argument supporting Prop 50, and she's in the TV ads supporting. So she's giving basically the imprimatur of a commissioner, saying that it's okay, Californians, to undo this commission work that I was part of, because we're in an existential threat situation with the Trump administration. In order to defend democracy, we need to do this mid-decade redistricting. So I'm going to be on a panel with her on Monday down at Pomona. She was up at the Athenaeum yesterday. So she's sort of actively engaged in discussion and debate about that. The Rose Institute is going to be, in addition to this video we put out, we have an Athenaeum event scheduled for October 15th, where we're going to be bringing in one of the commissioners on the first Citizens Redistricting Commission. Her name is Jody Filkins Weber, and she is going to be speaking in making the case in defense of preserving independent redistricting commissions. I guess the last thing I would say is the Rose Institute takes no official position on ballot measures. That's our Board of Governors has made that a policy of the Institute that we don't support or oppose candidates or ballot measures. And so we're not advocating either for or against Prop 50, but we do think it's important sort of on the campus because there's been programming sort of supporting Prop 50 for us to provide some balance on that. So that's why we're bringing in a commissioner who's going to be defending the commission's work. And I also will say, for those of you who have longer history and knowledge of the Rose Institute and its work in this area, you know that we have been opposed to partisan gerrymandering in California and other states, and were involved in the creation of the commission 20 years ago. And so this is something that is actually of great interest to us personally. We can understand why people might take opposing views given the political circumstances in the country these days, but we do think that the commission process is important and valuable, and we hope that whatever comes out of this particular circumstance in California and nationally this year will ultimately lead to greater adoption of independent commissioning in the future, because I just don't think this is good government for states to be distorting representation in a way basically to maximize the majority party's representation in Congress. If you have a situation in California which is more than 1/3 Republican or Republican leaning, but is getting less than 10% of the seats in Congress, that if proportionality is at least somewhat important in terms of representation, this is distorting that. And so and the opposite's happening in Texas, right? And so I just don't think that this is good government, and that's part of what we're interested in promoting is good government at the state and local level. Okay, so that's enough for now. I think I'd love to hand it over to Rebecca and Quentin for sort of recognizing questions. We'll take the balance of our time with Q&A.
Thank you, Professor Miller and Quentin. Thanks so much for rushing over after your exam. I'm sure it was a very hectic afternoon. We have here a question from Jeff Hull, which says, which states might have similar distortions between voter party affiliation / votes and congressional representation? Is distortion the norm?
Yeah, so there's a range. I mean, there are some states that have one member of Congress, like Wyoming, right? And so there's no, I mean, it's 100-0 Republican, right? In those kinds of states. But there's also no manipulation of districts to get to that result. I would say that it's increasingly the case, especially in states without commission systems, for there to be, so a state like Illinois, for example, has been, district lines have been drawn to advantage the Democratic Party there. And as I've said, Texas advantages the Republican Party, some other red states, North Carolina, Florida, others. It's a natural impulse of the majority party to try to maximize partisan advantage in drawing district lines. And so in terms of the skew, I can't think of, well, I can't think of any where you have 1/3 of the population. Massachusetts would be good. See, this is good. Quentin's a good resource here. So say more about that.
Yeah, so correct me if I'm wrong. I believe Massachusetts has about 9 congressional districts, and Trump in 2024 received about 1/3 of the vote. It is possible, to the best of my knowledge, that you can squeeze about 2 Republican seats out of Massachusetts using the 2024 presidential elections, although those are very ugly districts. But this is just kind of gets to one of the fundamental tensions within redistricting and representation, is how how much is proportional, especially when you're using single member districts. Is single member districts kind of force an awkward setup sometimes with like the proportionality of a state, specifically if a state has a very weird geographic like pattern to it. Like in Massachusetts, for example, like the rural area, and I'm not an expert in Massachusetts geography, so I'm going to describe this to the best of my ability, is the rural areas outside of Boston, but before you hit like Amherst, and it stretches down kind of in the Portuguese, more ethnically Portuguese towns, kind of by, I believe that's Bedford Falls. Those are the most Republican-leaning towns in Massachusetts, but that's a very awkward geographic configuration. So if you kind of are a proponent of keeping districts within county borders, it ends up being a very ugly district, and this is just a fundamental tension within single-member districts.
All right.
Right. I have another question here that asks, is it possible that Democrats could win some of the 5 newly drawn districts in Texas? You indicated that one of the California districts may not actually switch to Democrats.
You have a take on that?
Yeah, so there's a good article from Daily Kiosk from Jeff Neer, who used to write for Daily Kiosk Elections. Now he is a Democratic-leaning like affiliate, so just take that with a grain of salt. But he argues that it's unlikely that Texas's map will be a dummy mander or a gerrymander that backfires. Texas did do a very good job in terms of drawing the maps for explicit partisan advantage. Before the final map was passed, I believe they switched out one county that had been relatively stagnant in terms of its overall presidential margin for the past decade. They switched, I forget what that was. It was an exurban suburban county with a very rural county that has swung hard to the right within the last 10 years, near the border of Louisiana, to make sure that one of those 5 districts they drew has almost no chance of being like an accidental flip during like a blue leaning midterm year.
Thank you. What impact do you think a measure like Proposition 50 will have on California voter turnout?
I guess the question, I could take that question one of 2 ways. What will the turnout be this November in the special election? And then how would this might affect turnout in the longer run? Right. So I'll take the second one first, which is, I mean, I do think that one of the advantages of the commission maps is that they created a fairly large number of quite competitive congressional districts. And that led to greater attention paid to those races. And voter turnout was pretty high, but there was also just larger engagement, more spending, funding for those races than otherwise would be if a district is safe, right? And so what you often see in safe districts is that there's maybe more attention paid to the primary, but once you get to the general election, there's very little sort of attention paid to the race, and it can have a depressing effect on voter turnout. So I do have a concern about a lot of safe districts, a diminution of competitive districts leading to less active democracy in congressional races. So in terms of the turnout for this election, I know we've talked about this a little bit. That why don't you speak to that one?
Yeah, so if you had asked about a decade ago which voter was probably the most likely to show up for a special election statewide ballot measure in November that coincided with some local city elections, you'd probably get a very Republican-leaning demographic. Now, within the past decade, the demographics of the parties have changed substantially. Democrats are now a much more highly educated party, and a person's level of education attainment does influence their propensity to vote to a pretty strong degree, in which you'd likely expect that the voters that show up this November will probably be white and will be relatively skewed in terms of like being more college educated than the general state as a whole. That is pretty good factors for a Democratic win, but turnout is not everything, and it does really depend on people's individual vote choice, which can be influenced by campaign advertising.
Thank you. So early on in the conversation, in your talk, Rick here asked he was wondering about your thoughts on the Louisiana recent redistricting as it pertains to race.
Yeah, so I'm not an expert on the Voting Rights Act, and I've been trying to follow the case to the best of my ability, but I ultimately expect that over time the Voting Rights Act's level of enforcement has significantly declined, and it was kind of a surprise to me, at least, with the Milligan decision in 2024 that Alabama received a second black VRA seat. I think ultimately it would not be surprising to me if Louisiana's brief experiment with two black VRA seats ends relatively shortly after the upcoming Supreme Court term.
This question here that we have says, how would the framers have addressed the issue had they known states would have so many representatives from individual states? Is there a case to be made that partisan gerrymandering is merely a manifestation of federalism?
Yeah,
Well, I
go
can
for it.
speak about that in at least one context. So
Yeah.
I always like looking at like the comparative context with other English-speaking countries, and I think the closest examples would be Canada and Australia. They're both federal systems, and while they do operate under like a parliamentary system, which is different than our presidential system, in both cases, there's a national election agency that ultimately does the redistricting for their lower house. And I think that that is probably the best solution for the US is that if we look at our comparative neighbors, those countries both have redistricting done on a nonpartisan level at the national level. And even within Australia, within the 20th century, there was a variety of state level gerrymanders that eventually were eliminated by creating like independent redistricting commissions, and that was done at a state by state level. But on a national level for the House of Representatives for Australia, that is done by, I believe it's the Australian Election Agency.
Just follow up on that. There is a federalism dimension to this for sure, which is to say that different states have different internal rules. So California has constraints on partisan gerrymandering, and a state like Texas doesn't. And having sort of what Democrats would say, that's an unlevel or uneven playing field, right? And so one of the proposed solutions is to have federal legislation that would either ban mid-decade redistricting or require independent redistricting commissions at the state level. And Zoe Lofgren from California has proposed legislation along those lines. So that's a potential solution, is to try to have a national solution to this problem of uneven political rules at the state level.
Would you say this is an unusual moment with the president directly targeting certain states and elected officials for retaliation? In that context, doesn't California have a particular stake in protecting the balance of Congress?
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned that I know of no precedent for a president of the United States getting actively involved in state level redistricting, at least in such a public and explicit way, right? And so that is unusual. And if you listen to my colleague, Professor Sadwani over at Pomona, she would say, I believe in the maxim that two wrongs don't make a right, but I also believe that if a bully comes after you, you can fight back, right? And so that's basically some of the the sentiment of especially Democrats and in California, saying we feel like Trump is breaking norms by going into red states, especially Texas, and trying to pick up an advantage in House races in mid-decade. And so why should we hold back if if he's going to play that way? So it's obviously an argument that's top of mind for a lot of people. It's certainly what's at top of mind of, I think it's Ace Smith, who's running the political campaign for the Yes on 50 campaign. It's all about Trump. It's all about blocking Trump, about blocking, rigged election and all of that. It's not about the intricacies of independent redistricting commissions or things like that. It's all about fighting Trump is what it's all about.
Okay, we have time for one more question. It's from Tony Gonzalez. Is the adoption of a constitutional amendment requiring all states to create independent redistricting commissions for House seats even remotely plausible?
It's a great question, Tony. Thanks. So I spent a lot of time in Gov 20 and Con Law just talking about the difficulty of Article 5 amendment procedure. We haven't had a real amendment. We've had this kind of odd amendment, the 27th Amendment, that was actually proposed back in with the Bill of Rights and got ratified somehow, weirdly, fairly recently. But the last real amendment was in the early 1970s, the 26th Amendment to allow younger people to vote. And, that was not there wasn't really a partisan divide over that. And the country wasn't polarized the way it is now. And so there would have to be some sort of confluence of factors. The way I've started to think about it is almost like Cold War, right? Negotiation over nuclear missiles, right? If there's a sense by both sides, red and blue sides, that it might be in everyone's interest to come up with some sort of negotiated agreement to try to reduce the amount of if it's going to be like every election cycle, every state is going to try to redistrict to maximize congressional seats. That might become a situation where there's enough public dissatisfaction with that there might be enough political pressure on both parties that would cause them to maybe try to come up with some solution that would be acceptable to both. Because one of the things about this is that it does, if it's perceived that there's an advantage to one party or the other, then I think it'd be very difficult to get a constitutional amendment through. But if there's a sense that both sides maybe suffer under this kind of regime and might be vulnerable to disadvantage politically, then there might be an opportunity for a constitutional amendment. But I think it's a very long shot.
Okay, I see that we still have time, so I'm going to squeeze in one more question from Bill Baker. What would be the results in California if Proposition 50 is rejected? Would that be a sea of change in California?
Yeah, I'll take that one. I think it would be a big problem for Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom has staked the last year of his governorship essentially on this issue. Well, confronting Trump generally, but sort of staking his reputation on being able to take Trump on in this particular way, engaging with a countermeasure on redistricting. And if he's unable to persuade California voters, a very blue state, anti-Trump state, to approve this change to the Constitution, I think that would be discrediting for him politically and be a big problem for him. I think it might be an interesting wake-up call in a way for California that there is a desire. I think California is going to remain anti-Trump in many, many ways, right? But I think there might be a desire to hold fast to some of the values that the state has advanced over time, including sort of a progressive notion of political reform that embraces independent redistricting. But there might be some recommitment to that, even as the state is trying to resist Trump. But I think probably the polls show this thing leading. It's uncertain given what voter turnout is going to be and all of that. I think Quentin's got an interesting analysis about who might be more likely to turn out in this election. But I think it would be a surprise if it fails, and I think it would be a shock to the Democratic Party and to Gavin Newsom if it does.
Okay. Well, first, thank you so much, Professor Miller, and to Quentin for joining us this afternoon and sharing your expertise. I hope that everyone enjoyed the conversation today and left with something to think about. Definitely, for sure, I did.
Rebecca, before we sign off, can I just say, this is pretty impressive, right?
Yes.
There aren't a lot of college students who can do this, right? So I think, we might have another Charlie Cook or something, you might just say a little bit more quickly about what your aspirations are. So.
Yeah. So I want to pursue a PhD in political science. That's been a long time dream of mine, and I think the Rose has given me an excellent opportunity to kind of evolve my research skills and become better at communicating and just improve my research generally. And I think CMC is a great institution for pushing me a lot further. And I'm very interested in voting behavior, specifically the effect of education attainment on people's voting behavior. And I look forward to doing further work like this in the future. And I'm immensely appreciative for the opportunity the Rose Institute and both CMC gave me to be able to get here.
Thank you. And thank you, Rebecca, for organizing this.
No problem. Thank you so much for joining. Just a quick reminder, our next CMC Connects event is November 13th with Professor Stephen Zhao, who will be talking about leadership and data science. So we hope that you'll join us then. And please make sure to keep a lookout for our email digest on Sundays with all of our virtual programming. Again, thank you everybody for joining, and we hope you have a good evening.